The OFX podcast. I'm Dave Claxton. Along with me, as always, is the already registered racer, Bethany McChesney, and one of the all-time goats of OCR, Nicole Mericle. I think it's that like you were definitively on the Mount Rush,
On the what?
on the Mount Rushmore of OCR.
Oh, thank you. It's a privilege to hear that.
And I'm sure it comes up a lot. Like, you know, there's you and Lindsay and Susanna, and then Beth.
No.
Well, it's also a privilege to be here talking to you guys. I'm so excited.
It's honestly been a long time coming. I think we bantered around a few times about getting it, and it just never happened. But like, you get a lot going on right now. Um, all right, where do we start? I wanted to actually ask you about, first off, it's been a bit of a comeback for you from injury. I mean, we think back to Hildervat, and I think my thing that got me was not only how tough physically it would have been, but like mentally, that was a long road.
I think that I didn't understand the ongoing impacts that I would deal with from the injury. It's almost like physically, I've been back. I raced last year. But honestly, I'm in a better physical state now, but I'm kind of dealing with more of the mental side of injury. Just being out of the sport for a little bit and kind of coming into like a little bit of a new era almost. And then obviously still having some apprehension, maybe not apprehension is the right word, but I don't really have like the physical apprehension anymore, but I have a bit of like the mental barrier there still with just fear of injury in general, I think.
Do you find that because of the injury too, there's like a trust that has to be rebuilt with your body also, with that it can handle certain things?
Yeah, that's been a big progression, being able to reintroduce all the elements that go into training for an obstacle race. So um, running, strength, and then for me, climbing is what makes up the majority of my obstacle training. With I would say the added component of jumping and landing plyometric type exercises to really bridge that gap from the general building strength and recovering to actually feeling confident, sport specific with landing and jumping off obstacles.
Mhm.
And I think I just took it for granted that all those things they fit in easier. My body handled all those things better before injury. Um, and to really get to the point where I can do all those again at the volume and the level that I'm used to has taken a considerable amount of time.
I think back to like when you first come back, and I think I can't even remember what race, but one of the first times I saw you racing back again. And I think the first rig you were dismounting on, and it was almost just like this kind of watch and see how you did it to see, what it was like for you. Because I mean, we've all had injuries, and just like that test and that race test where you're there and you're like, oh, I just hope it's all together.
Yeah, those first races last year, I wasn't that confident, honestly, in my knee. And it was almost this argument between my physical therapist. Like he's like, no, you're passing the tests, it's safe to return. And I'm like, I don't think you're right. Like are you absolutely sure? Even though I obviously wanted to return as soon as possible, but I was still kind of like hesitant and nervous.
Right. I wanted to talk, like I said, I mentioned that, and we'll get to some of the newer stuff too, and we don't want to linger too much in the past of it, but you obviously, I said, you're one of the goats out there. You've raced in what so far a lot of people would say was like the most dominant era of OCR. Getting out there now again, is the feeling similar? Is it coming back? Like, how does that start line feel compared to, days of the Fab Five and then you out there? And and Lindsay, and even when you know, I lost Rebecca Hammond was coming up through like back days like that. Like I look at like through 2017 to 2019 when things were just crazy. How's it feeling for you out there racing the women that are out there now comparatively?
It's interesting. Yeah, it's a different scene, you know. There's a lot of people that have left the sport altogether. Um, there's some people that have moved on to focus more on high rocks or um, Emma was in the sport for a hot second and then she's full on into skimo and trail racing, sky running. So the 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 scene has changed for sure. Um, I will say that a lot of my races last year and this year have been pretty international races. And so I wouldn't say um it's any less competitive necessarily, but um it seems like the competition is a bit spread out at times. So like last year, OCRWC maybe wasn't quite as deep because we had these other options. And so like all the Europeans went to the FISO World Championships in Belgium and didn't really come out to OCRWC. But you know, Lindsay and I still had an awesome battle. And we still had a bunch of the top Americans in that race. And then um, yeah, so but then I did go to the Belgium race and that was kind of like a new scene almost because um in like the heyday that you're talking about, that was a very American focused field. There was almost the separation between American OCR, which was very focused on Spartan races, and so um you had people that maybe weren't as adept at technical obstacles. And when you looked at the European scene, which is still the case today, I would say, you have athletes that are really more in that like ninja warrior type of end of the spectrum where they're doing really complicated obstacles and races. And you don't necessarily have to be as good of a runner. You have to have that obstacle proficiency really dialed. And especially back in the day, those two groups didn't really mix as much. So, which now I think they are kind of mixing a little bit more. You see Europeans like Leon coming over for races here, and then you see a lot of Americans going over to Europe as well. And with FISO, that kind of introduces this race that is a bit of a mix between the two.
So I hear people around from like, you know, the sport is dwindling or dying in the elite thing. And I don't really look at it that way. I look at it right now as Spartan is dwindling in North America and this not with the regular waves, but the elite waves is struggling. But like you say, overseas, it looks like it's rampant.
Yeah.
Like it, the races look exciting, the competition looks fierce, and it's just not over. It's just not over here. And I mean, like you said, it was so Spartan heavy.
Mhm.
So I guess the question is, can it come back? Will it come back? And what does it need, if so, to do so?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just talking to Rose about this today. We both live in Boulder, and so we get to train together a little bit, which is awesome. And Rose is someone who's been in the sport even longer than me, and so she's seen all of the changes within the sport. I think right when I came in was kind of on the tail end of the big NBC, CBS televised days, which, one could point to maybe that and some other forms of media that surrounded Spartan. Certainly, Spartan put effort into the elite side of the sport in a way that I think, they've gone a different direction lately. Um, and so, yeah, it's a question of is it, um, is there not as big of a following now? Is that because there's not as much media? Could we get that back? I'm not sure. um, is it is it like a product of there being a decline in just like the general numbers when it comes to Spartan races, which if that's the case, I think the numbers are going back up. So I don't know if that will translate into, age group and elites also filling back up again. It's like one of those things that I don't know if we have the answer to. Um, but yeah, you certainly pointed to obstacle racing expanding globally, which I think is even the case, I think, for Spartan. I know like they've moved into Asia quite heavily. Even last year I went to a race in Fiji, which was pretty spectacular. So yeah, it's kind of hard to say. I think that the sport in America for sure has changed significantly. And you can't just walk into the sport, do well and then feed into this like Spartan Pro program anymore,
Hmm.
which is how myself and a lot of us kind of like were able to really quickly rise in the sport and find support and garner sponsorships that allowed us to race more, compete more, get better, race better. So I think it's just like a more yeah, it's for me it's sad. It's sad to see that there's not this like clear path for a lot of athletes. Um, and again, it just kind of feels a little more scattered in general.
Go ahead, Beth.
Well,
Actually.
and we were even talking about that this year with the championships. Like it's the year of the all different championships. So even that being scattered, where it's not like every OCR athlete is coming together at like the Spartan World Championships. We have sprint championships and a beast championship, and then there's OCR championships, and then there's FISO, and like so like there's it's not like we have this one time when everyone gets to come together. So it is kind of spreading things out in that way too. And I think some of it too with OCR is we don't have a defined season where it kind of culminates at a championship race either. So championships can kind of be spread out all throughout the year. So in that way too, it feels very, very scattered.
Totally. I
Give me a
think the
sorry, go ahead.
introduction of hybrid racing too has, um, to some extent, maybe added to that because you have racers like crossing over more, and there is always some crossover between OCR and trail, I would say. Um, but hybrid is just this other sport that requires like such similar, you know, strengths and abilities that it's really easy to transition over for a lot of athletes. And it seems like it's super exciting and it's not really my thing. Although I've dabbled in one deca fit.
You did great.
It was fun. It was super fun, I will say, but High Rocks is like way more intimidating to me. And maybe there's like a day that I'll try that, but for now I kind of just enjoy like spectating and appreciating the athletes that are in the sport from the side of OCR still.
So there's one thing that we didn't really touch on it, and I'll be honest, it's almost like the elephant in the room. I think personally that the athletes, and not being one, so you guys are them, athletes have lost trust in Spartan because of slow payments or whatever the case may be, and maybe just not living up to the expectations they had put forward. And that's personally what I think needs to change in order to win the athletes back. You got to have the athletes trusting you. Um,
Mhm.
and if they don't, why the hell are they going to show up? Like if they don't
Totally.
believe what you tell them, they're just not going to be there. So I think personally, I think that's why they've lost some of the elite field is just a lack of trust, and I think that will take time to build back. Hopefully, they can.
Yeah.
I'm
Yep.
yeah, I'm hearing they're getting a little better.
That is, I will say, it does seem to me like payments are happening and they're catching up. Um, so yeah, I think that fingers crossed that trust is being rebuilt, but that certainly is why some athletes have completely left. That was one reason why I didn't go to the World Championships last year,
Mhm.
the Spartan World Championships. And I think it especially in this time where there's kind of less sponsorships and Spartan isn't supporting athletes to get to races. With that coupled with paying late with prize money, it makes it really hard to commit to races.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it would take a whole lot though to get like some athletes just coming back. Like I think people are just, pay them and then the next, just pay them promptly. And like I think there's such a love for Spartan and a lot of us kind of started there and fell in love with the sport and not because it was an opportunity to make money, but because we genuinely loved it. So I don't think it would be that hard necessarily to rebuild trust of like kind of a core group of like original kind of people that love Spartan for what it was to begin with. Like, I mean, a lot of us, we say too, we don't really race for the money. Like we genuinely love it. So it's kind of hard to step away, but you kind of feel like it's what you have to do in order to make a stance. But yeah, I think Spartan, if they just got a couple things right when it comes to dealing with the elites, it wouldn't be that hard. They also need to bring back a little bit more media attention because it's also something that's lost. Like we don't see any coverage of races anymore. Like barely even like Instagram stories of what's going on. We just kind of get a post after about who won, and then we'll see people their own personal videos that happen. So it's hard to be a fan also of the elite side of it when you have no idea whatever goes on in races.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think that's that dynamic with the lack of media, a potential lack of fan base, but how do you have a fan base if, there's nothing to show?
Mm-hmm.
No, and you don't know who you did, and if you don't know who the athletes are, right? You
Mhm.
don't know who you're cheering for. You don't have a vested interest. If you don't have a vested interest, you're not likely to root, right?
Yeah.
Unless they start allowing us to gamble on it, then anybody will watch. They'll gamble for sure. We'll get lots of people. But I will say that, I mean, what's your report? They're trying. They try,
Yeah.
but they're so limited in funding and manpower and all that. You're only going to get so much from it, right? But this last one, this Pan Am Championship, even though it was not live, it had a bit like a hint of the feel from before.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, just, it wasn't all the way there. Like I think back to like one of my favorites, obviously, I helped with it as a rabbit, but Blue Mountain up here, what I think that was the last North American Championship up here in Blue Mountain or whatever,
Yeah.
one of the races. That was great when I loved watching that one online. It was really good. I think most of it being Blue Mountain has great phone signal. So that helps a lot. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Those logistics.
this one had a bit of a feel to it. Like, did it feel any different? Is it like, was it a
Oh,
bit
it
of a
was super
throwback?
fun. Yeah, I mean, there were familiar faces. There were some people like um, Ian and Rylan, who haven't necessarily been on the scene. Rylan's been having some health issues and also focused more on hybrid, and then Ian just hasn't raced in a while. And like they were both there. And then on the women's side, we had like Ashley and Casey and Rose was there. And Lauren Weeks came over from, she needed a break from just the monotony of High Rocks running around in circles in an arena, I think. um, yeah, so it felt more like um, kind of like the old days of like everyone actually is coming out to this race. And um, even just like the course was a bit gnarly in ways that was reminiscent of those like 2016, 2017 years, which felt a little reckless, but also fun. But again, yeah, you're like, you mentioned it, how um, yeah, no one's, maybe there's like a few of us who were racing full time for a while, but beyond that, like we all started this not to make money. and and most racers aren't making money from it, or they're certainly not counting on like a paycheck, and um we're doing it because it's fun. And that's like, when I was thinking about going out to Seattle, um I wanted to make sure that they still had the prize money there, right? But also I was like, well, who's gonna go? Like, is it gonna be fun? Like, are we gonna,
Yeah.
are a bunch of us gonna be able to stay together? And sure enough, like shared a big house with people, and it definitely makes it more enjoyable and have to have a community there.
Well, and you did get like the rise of a couple of stars, I think anyway, in like Balin Bean, like
Yeah, you have
young
new
new blood
racers.
and
Hmm.
good. Like he's good at any time. It's not like he's just, oh, he was there and raced and he's legit. He's really
He's
good.
22.
Yeah, he's just a pup.
He's a little baby.
But man, he can move, and he's got the right. He's got the background. He's got the running background, the rock climbing background. That's what he does. He's, it's right there. So it's
Yeah,
exciting to see him. Our own Brendan Neely, like going out there, and he's had a great year this year, and he's like
yeah,
becoming this face. So there are some new faces coming, but I think goes back to like you say. Now they need to publicize them and get them out there and do some more media with them, even if it's just Spartan media. Like get it moving, get some traction so that we can grow the sport.
yeah.
Anyway,
Well, that's
I,
even how, I mean, if we want to talk about this, they have Spartan has Spartan Instagram and then Spartan Race. The
yeah,
Spartan Race Instagram was founded as the Spartan Pro Team's account. And
okay.
it was built up with the stories of the pro team athletes. And then at some point, they just switched it over um, into, yeah, what I guess it's somewhat different than Spartan, the normal Spartan account, but it's no longer like
Mhm.
an athlete focused account.
I
Mhm.
had no idea that was the case. I didn't know that's how it
Yeah.
started out.
Hmm.
I always wondered like why the hell do they have two of these things?
Yeah.
And it was just like an extra thing to have to tag. It's like, oh, gee.
Yeah. But that would be so great. Like, and I mean, on the women's side, there was Cassandra Gill, who's been having a phenomenal season too. And, just a little, even like post race interviews, like put that on there and just like, show her face, hear her voice, like chat about how was your race? What have you been doing for training? Where are you going from here? Like, just a little bit more about the athletes. And it doesn't take that much. It's just, again, someone with a phone and then they
Yeah.
take a video and then they put it on there to showcase the athletes that we're watching in these races. Because
I
unless
mean, in
someone
some
takes the
ways,
time to go onto their Instagram and start scoping out these people, you don't really know anything about them.
yeah. I would say in some ways it's easier to get media and content out there now than it was, 8 6 8 years ago when I started in the sport. Uh,
Mhm.
but yeah, it does require more than just like one or two guys from the OCR report. Like they just don't have the bandwidth.
No,
Mhm.
no.
um,
Like Beth says too, just like the finish line interview. We have a guy up here for Spartan Canada, Fidel, who is at all the big races and he's always going and doing little interviews at the finish line and stuff. And that little thing helps so much.
yeah.
Like at these big races, like there should be, and like someone like you, there should definitively be like a finish line interview. There should have been like a little sit down beforehand, just a chat, even if whatever. But I don't know. I think right now they're just in a position of the money is in the open and the age group, and so that's where we're going to focus right now. And hopefully, like I mean, stay focused there, but
Hmm.
bring a little more sport to it. We miss it.
Well, and it's not even that. It's, they now own all these other trail races and stand-up paddleboard races and, Tough Mudder. And I think it's now this
Spreading
larger
too thin.
event company. Yeah.
Hot take: I think a stand-up paddleboard race would probably be the most boring thing in the world to watch. Yeah, I don't know. I've never seen professional
Dave,
stand-up
you watch
paddleboarders.
car racing.
Yeah, but they're going fast.
Yeah,
You ever
but
seen
People
people stand up
people love car
paddleboard?
racing.
What's that?
Oh, people love car racing. That's true.
Yeah, they're going quick. Stand-up paddleboards. I mean, and I'll be honest, I've never seen anybody that like would be a racer at it, but the people I've seen on stand-up paddleboards, it don't look much like a race. All right. So let's get to FISO. Let's get to the elephant in the room here. You were one of the athletes who has, and I don't want to use this term, but like bought in or shown some support just by attending races put on by the federations. And I believe you have been supportive of the USA OCR and all that stuff. Correct me if I'm wrong. Um, So yeah, but recently you went down, you were over in Belgium last year and did very well. And then this year you went down to Costa Rica. And both events have had, they're newer events. They've had a bit of growing pains, so to speak.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to let you talk about your Costa Rica experience and you can put it
All
out
right.
there.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Well, so first of all, so I know that this question comes up all the time, so I'll just touch on it. Um, so FISO World Obstacle is the governing body for obstacle racing globally. And then you have each country has their own federation. So USA OCR is a totally separate organization from FISO, led by a team of volunteers that have spent tons of hours trying to build this organization in the States so that athletes can have safety practices in place at races. There's things that are in place in terms of training athletes and like coaching certifications, I believe. And then just like the general goal of that organization is to grow the sport in the States. And Canada like has a federation as well, and a bunch of countries do. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. Um, and your federation does have to work with World Obstacle in order to send athletes to the World Championships, for instance. And I think like abide by certain rules, but they are still like separate organizations. So I've been involved with USA OCR a little bit, and I've been supported by them to get to the World Championships for a couple years now. And Belgium was my first experience there. And it, like you said, wasn't without some faults. My general perspective of that race was I wasn't super privy to any like major snafus, maybe like the toilets overflowing a little
You
bit, but
heard some issues with with
um
the toilets.
yeah. Um, and then I know there was like one little, maybe not little, but there was one issue with the men's 3K, I believe, where a couple athletes ended up sharing a podium spot because of a controversial rule about how the athlete started the obstacle. So, um, yeah, so there's a couple of those things. As I seem to remember too, there was like maybe a couple obstacles that ended up not being finished in time to be part of the race. But really, my experience there was really positive, and especially as someone coming from more of the Spartan background, it's kind of exciting to do different ones like Savage and OCRWC, and so having this different format was exciting, and seeing new obstacles was fun. So so I had been kind of warned by some people, I would say, um, about how, FISO may not be totally, um, totally seeking out the athletes' perspectives and what the athletes, want for the sport. And I think that's been like the main issue, at least in the past when with FISO getting established and not having a ton of athlete input. Um, so so that's what I kind of heard beforehand, but my Belgium experience was like overall positive. Um, then Costa Rica was this year, and my understanding is that FISO is, the overall governing body, and they work with a local company, a local, the local federation, in order to put on the World Championships. So they worked with Belgium, and then in Costa Rica, they're working with the Costa Rica Obstacle Federation, and the people that are really like executing the event, I think, are for the most part the local organization. But that's one thing that I'm not quite sure, who was in charge of what, but ultimately FISO is the organization that is in charge. So I guess that's probably who, has the last say and who has to like make sure things are in order. So, so when I went to Costa Rica, there were several things that I was surprised to see, I would say. And then some things that I honestly felt like for something to be called a world championship, there needs to be a certain level of professionalism, a certain level of transparency that really wasn't present at the event. And that's something that, you know, I don't say that lightly. And I don't want to, I want to see this organization, you know, succeed, and I want to see obstacle racing grow. And certainly was disheartened you know, to go to this event and see many obstacles not built for the race. I think there was a half built Olympus stairway to, or what's it called? Stairway where that you're not stairway to Sparta, but the one that you're like campus on.
Oh
Those
yeah,
two
yeah, yeah.
tires. Um, I think there might have been one other, but there were 3 or 4 obstacles just in the 3K that were like that we ran past that were not finished for the race. And this again is a race that is supposed to be representative of a bunch of different obstacle races around the world. It's kind of known for being this really obstacle dense technical race, and it was very sparse when it came to obstacles. So that was in the 3K. In the 15K, same thing. I think what I heard was that the race was supposed to have 50 obstacles. And it was supposed to be 14K. And it ended up only having like 20 or something. So
Oh,
people were making jokes after, like, oh, it was a cross country race. Like, and
That hurts.
again, yeah, there's like, you know, these like some walls that had like caution tape across them. And then there is this scaffolding that, that you, the the race course ran through it. So you couldn't avoid it. It was like right in the way, but it wasn't finished. There was no bells. There was no way to start on it. But what's kind of funny is that Logan did this obstacle still. I ran up to it and I remember like looking around and being like, what is this? You know, but I didn't see how to start it. I didn't see any bells, and I was like, oh, okay, like no one's here. Like this is an unfinished obstacle. But apparently Logan jumped up on it and he like shimmied across on some, like, you know,
Made
shaky
his
poles.
made his own path.
Yeah. And then he was like, oh wait, I guess there's nothing here. Jumped down. Um, so there's just like some kind of bizarre things like that. And yeah, and so that's one aspect I would say, is that there were unfinished obstacles, and a lot of them. The other component that I kind of saw this theme the whole weekend was an inconsistency with rules, a failure to communicate rules ahead of time clearly and effectively to a field that's international and speaks multiple languages. Um, and then some instances of, um, you know, enforcing rules, non-uniformly. And then after the fact, there there being kind of just like chaos in the appeal process, um, in decisions being flip-flopped, and then a failure of communication to the athletes after the fact as well. So one example that I'll give you is in the co-ed team race. I was racing with the USA team, and we were in the last heat. So I think there was 3 heats, and we happened to be in the last one.
How does that happen?
I think it was just a,
Random?
no, it wasn't random. I think it was a mistake from our federation actually. but
Okay, okay.
but it was fine. We were like, you know what,
Sorry, Ian.
we have the 3 of us to, you know, to run it, like to run with, like we'll push each other. We're like, it's fine, you know. But yeah, the faster teams were in the first heat, and we're racing, and we're coming up to this obstacle that has been in the races in both the 3K and the 15K. So it's not a new obstacle. It's one that's been there. There's, it's in the rule book. We're approaching this obstacle, and Ian Hosick is spectating and he's cheering us on. And he comes up next to us and he goes, "Guys, you have to touch every single rope on this obstacle." And so he's saying people are having their bands cut if you don't touch every single rope. And this is a third day of race date. And honestly, at this point, I'm like, okay, yeah, this checks out. Like, we're changing the rules mid race. Cool. Um, so, and this again, imagine being in a Spartan race and then being told, like, you have to touch every single monkey bar. Like, you can't skip rings or whatever. Like, it's just a rule that I've never heard in any race before. It certainly was not in the rule book and it was not told to us on the start line. So, but we're like, okay, whatever. And we approach this obstacle, and the officiant there, he tries to stop Logan, he's the first in line to go. And he's like, wait, I have to tell you something. And Logan's like, no, I'm going, but we've all like, so he tried to tell us like something like, yeah, you guys got to touch every rope. But we're like, we heard. And we get through, we get done. We're like, we're all clear. We finish. And we're like, what was that about? Right. And then we ended up talking to the Netherlands team, and they're like, oh yeah, we had our band cut there. And they, I think, are a little more used to like petitions and, rule issues. Maybe in general, they're more used to that in Europe because they have this different structure of racing. But
and super complex obstacles where there's more controversy.
Mm-hmm. I think so. There's just like more nuance too, with like, you can't grab this implement too high, and maybe incidental touching of the rope it's hanging from is okay, but if you grab it, it's not okay, and that line is somewhat blurred. And so anyway, so they in the race, they had their bands cut. They finished, they did the penalty lap at the end, which they had to do because they lost their band. And then they tried to petition after the fact. And I honestly, I don't even know what the result was, because they said, all we want is to get 30 seconds back on our time, which wouldn't have moved them place wise. And I don't know if that ended up happening or not. But and I think, and there's other there's like other issues with teams being told to cut their band, and then them arguing with the officials and not letting them cut them, and which I don't know like what I would have done, because if I had done that obstacle and I had been told, oh no, you didn't do it right, like, yeah, I probably would have been like, what are you talking about? Like this, I did it the same way I did it the last 2 days.
Right.
This like this has been a pet peeve thing. Like, this is obstacle design. Like, you don't. I think a lot of the designers of these obstacles, in order to try to come up with something new and interesting, they get way too complicated and go way overboard. Like, all of a sudden, oh, well, I want them to go through it like this. Well, if you want the athletes to go through an obstacle a certain way, design it so that's the way they have to go through it, so that there's no choice. Right. It drives me nuts. And then with the, touch the straps, this, whatever, like that, they need to take a lesson from a lot of ninja competitions where it's just, they'll often paint. And I think of World Championships I was at one year. If it was black, you don't touch it. It's a fail. If it's red, you can touch it. And that was it.
Yeah.
And then no matter what happened at that point, you were good. I think these guys need to make their rules and stick with it. And no matter what happens, well, that's the rule. Even if someone comes up with some crazy way they never thought of to get through it, that's way easier. Doesn't matter. That was the rule. We'll change the obstacle next time to make that not work. But you have to touch everything or this. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like, what are they going to do next? Oh, you can't do it bent arms. You got to be full extension. Like, we can't.
Well, so my guess, and again, I don't know for sure, there was no follow-up on this, but my guess of why this happened was because they didn't have enough volunteers to be officials. I know that was an issue. They said, oh, we had all these volunteers signed up, and then they kind of all fizzled at the end, like when it came time to actually have these races. So I think they were short on volunteers, which comprise the officials. I think that, again, it's an international event. There's people from all over, and a lot of the volunteers came from other nations. Like, I know that some of the kids that we had on our team competing, their parents were there to spectate, to be there with their kids, and would also act as an official as well. So my guess is they had, a meeting in the morning. Okay, this is your obstacle. Here are the rules. And there was just a miscommunication between they have to touch the first rope and they have to touch every rope.
Yeah.
So that's what I think happened, but I don't know for sure. But to your point, I will say that in general, a lot of us do think that obstacles should be rather intuitive. If you have to, spend 5 minutes explaining it, it's just honestly not a good obstacle. Like,
No, I think back to one of the best bits of design was that Kempson rig at I think it was
yeah.
NORAM at the time, the Kempson rig, where it
Mhm.
was just any way you could get across it, but there was just so many options to go. And I'm like, that's good design. That's cool.
That was a good
Um,
one.
yeah, so it's like to see a little more of that. But anyway, so how did you guys end up doing
How do we do?
on the team race?
Oh, on the team race. Oh, we ended up winning.
There you
Uh,
go. That's what I was trying
And
to
actually,
get.
what was really cool, I will say, is that we placed our time what would have been the second fastest in the men's race
Oh,
as
wow.
well. So we had a good team. That was probably the most fun race, even though it was a little wonky.
Well, we say it all the time. The relays are always the most fun.
Yeah, that is
Team
true.
races are always the
Sure.
best.
They are.
They're always the best. All right. So then you did the team. We had that stuff. Let's talk about your solo races and how that went, and if you can work that out, how you placed there.
Yeah. The 3K was so I don't want to say disappointing because my whole aim in going to this race, I honestly, I did, I waffled a little bit about going or not, um, partly because of how my body has been feeling post the Infinity race in Saudi Arabia that was 8 hours long, 50 miles. Um, but also, yeah, because of kind of this controversy that exists within this organization, right? Um, so I kind of went into it not really knowing where my body was and thinking, I don't get a lot of time on obstacles. I primarily rock climb. We don't have a ton of facilities in Colorado. But yeah, but some of it is just that I choose to not go to the ninja gyms as often, save my labrums in my shoulders and rock climb more. But so I thought it would be a really great opportunity to just go get on obstacles and, um, you know, like mix it up with whoever was going to go. Wasn't really sure if it was going to be well attended or not. And it kind of turned out, Ida had to pull out because of a shoulder injury. But then I think like Alyssa came at the last second and, um, so went into it, needless to say, kind of low expectations. I was like, I'm here to have fun. I'm here to like see where my body is. And I don't know if that mentality um, played into failing an obstacle, but I fell off of this obstacle that were hanging bananas,
Oh
uh,
yeah,
which I thought was a little funny because I don't
reeks of
know.
professionalism.
Yeah. So there are some hanging bananas that were quite slippery. And I started moving through them, and people had warned me that these were challenging. But when I first got on it, I was like, oh, these feel great. I don't know what people are talking about. And then I decided to try to like skip and swing bigger. And the second I did that, I just kind of like my grip shifted a little bit and I just like came off. So, maybe got a little bit cocky, I don't know. Um, but yeah, I think I might have been a little more conservative if I had a different mindset going in. But so I failed this obstacle. And then I just kind of I was enjoying myself, but I was also having a hard time really finding that gear to push hard, to not only, get back in the race, but I would have needed to put like a minute gap on the field in order to make up the penalty loop that I had to do. Because nobody else in the top, the top 5 or whatever racers failed anything. And so anyway, so I came in, I ran in with Ulrika and Alyssa in the first wave, which did not have the full podium ultimately because Beatrice, Canadian runner, was seated in, I think, the third wave. So, great for her. She still had an awesome race, but she wasn't able to actually be with like the rest of the fast racers, which is kind of another complication that we've seen with FISO. That was like one thing that happened in Belgium for sure. Was like there was a little bit more bizarre seating in Belgium, I would say actually. But here, unfortunately, she wasn't in the first wave. So came in, I had to do the penalty loop. And then Ulrika won that race. Alyssa finished second, but then she was bumped to third. I believe that was the ranking. I could be messing that up. And I think, I don't know.
Yeah, Beatrice came second.
Beatrice came second?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's right. And then yeah, because of the, again, my dog is hungry. I don't know if you could hear that. So yeah, so I ended up 5th place. And I don't know what would have happened had I not failed the obstacle. Come here, buddy. Come here. Okay. Benji's a little bit demanding when he wants food or water.
We both got dogs. We can relate.
Yeah. Benji, you're gonna have to wait a little bit. But yeah, so come here. Okay, we're good now, I think. He settled. Yeah, so I don't know. 3K was kind of it felt like a good experience. It's always good to fail, I think, because you learn things.
Yeah.
And I definitely learned, oh yeah, like when I'm in certain settings, it can pay to be more conservative. And there's other points where you can take more risks, and sometimes that just comes down to what type of format you're dealing with. Like OCRWC, it's you get multiple tries, it's obstacle mandatory completion, and so you, like, for me at least, that makes me feel like I can take more chances, and if I slip off in the first second, I can just start again. This race, you have your band cut, you have to do a sizable penalty. It doesn't work as well. So learn some things. Yeah, so that's how the 3K went. And then the 14K ended up being a bit short. I think it was more like 12K. And that one, I would say I just ended up being really confused in the race. I skipped an obstacle. And then later I realized that the girls in front of me did not skip the obstacle. And so I felt that I had done something wrong, and kind of spent some time like talking to Alyssa to confirm that if she had done this obstacle or not, and then talking to my two of my friends who were just spectating, and like trying to communicate with the race directors, and it was just kind of a bit confusing, and I just wasn't really like fully present in like full racing mode, I would say. And at that point, just, yeah, I kind of was like, we were running past these obstacles that were unfinished, and there was like, there had already been these like rule complications. And I think it was like within that race that I was kind of like, oh, this isn't quite the experience that I came for.
Mhm.
And there ended up just being a lot of confusion after the race that I felt like kind of took away from a lot of people's races. And I think left a lot of us with like a bad taste in our mouth. And it almost, I would say, yeah, it didn't quite feel like it had that like pure spirit of competition where, like, you ran your hardest, everybody had the same playing field, and like things were clear and transparent. So yeah, so it's kind of a bummer, but yeah, I think, it's something that hopefully we can learn from. I don't know.
Well, and just so we are clear, it's not like you were just willy-nilly skipping obstacles, right? There
No.
was there was you guys were told some obstacles were out of play, as you said, because they weren't completed on the build. By the way, build group, red tape around the outside of an obstacle that's not complete works wonders. No
which
problem.
some which some obstacles did have.
Yeah.
And that was part of the confusion for me, is that when I went around this one obstacle, I was like, it was one of those things where in the middle of the race you're like, well, I don't, I have to make a split second decision.
Mhm.
And and yeah, you're like, you're not really
That,
thinking
that should never be on the
clearly.
athlete to have to decide, do I do an obstacle or not, to even have to
Or
comprehend
does
that.
it look like a complete obstacle, or does it not look like a complete obstacle? Like, is it finished or not? I'm not really sure. Like, you shouldn't have to be making those decisions in a race.
No, no.
Well, I didn't think that factored in, honestly. It was just confusing because of the lack of communication beforehand.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the big issue was that there wasn't clear communication on the start line. What I heard was communicated via some officials telling our federation, and like one of our age group athletes putting it into our group team chat. Like that's how the rule was communicated to me.
The
Yeah.
rule about going around certain obstacles.
Yeah, about there's a few walls at the beginning that are not finished. Don't do those. But that wasn't the obstacle that was in question ultimately. But again, like I told you guys before, in that race, there was the structure that was incomplete that
Yep.
Logan jumped up and tried to do. So yeah, there's like sandbags off to the side. Um, that again, it was like a double take, like, wait a second. Okay, there's no race markings over there. Like those look abandoned. There's nobody over there. But yeah.
It does. I can see. I could be very frustrated, very, very frustrating.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and it is a little, it's a little disappointing, but I like I still have hope somehow they'll figure this shit out. But I don't. How do you think they can fix it? How do you think they make the communication better? Because clearly that's the number one thing is they're not making it clear to you, like, or the athletes or the federations, what's going on, what's not going on, because nobody seems to know.
Well, again, I think that it raised the question of, who dropped the ball in the situation. Was it FISO? Was it the local organization? I mean, ultimately, I think, yeah, the head person, the head organization probably bears the responsibility for what happens.
Hmm.
But there was certainly a breakdown in communication that didn't happen to the same extent in Belgium, or my understanding is the other races that they've held. Um, I guess I can't. Maybe I shouldn't say that because I don't know enough about the European Championships um, and yeah, but to me, I think that I think this is one thing that really, like, you can look to Spartan and see that they've done a good job. There's things are pretty darn clear of what you can touch and what you can't touch on obstacles. You know, there's been little things here and there. There's been, you know, the truss fiasco
Yeah.
of with Ryan Woods in
10-minute penalty for
2019.
touching the truss.
Yeah. And I don't know if I totally agree with like that severity of penalty.
No, that was daft.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Which is like, that's the thing. Like when I'm racing and I didn't, you know, I messed up an obstacle, I'm like, well, am I going to get, you know, a 10-minute penalty? Because that's what I'm used to. um, but
So
yeah, I think you have to communicate, especially with an international race. Everything has to be clearly communicated well in advance. And if there's any deviation from that, I don't know how to best communicate that on the start line, because it doesn't seem fair when you have so many athletes with who speak different languages.
do you think that maybe FISO has made a mistake in some of the places where they've decided to hold these? As in, like when I think of experienced obstacle racing hotbeds, Costa Rica does not come to mind. Do you think if they held, so let's say Denmark, the States, Poland, South Africa, some of these places that have really good, the UK, really good obstacle racing history, and lots of companies that host these races, do you think that they would have better success then because they'd be dealing with companies that know how to put these on?
Yeah, and that is, I mean, that's one thing. It's hard. It's hard to come away from the experience and say, you know, oh, I never want to go to this race again, or I don't want to support them or whatever, because um, you know, I know Sweden is holding the race next year, and they already have a race course. They've put on many events there. I've talked to the race director, and they seem to run, yeah, a tight ship. So I, you know, I'd like to say that that all makes me feel that next year's race will be well planned and well executed. And certainly in just talking to the race director briefly, he's very aware of past controversies and like kind of the major pitfalls that OCR has experienced.
I have high hopes for Sweden. I really do.
Yeah, are you
That's,
going
I,
to
no, 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 too far, too far.
go?
But I have high hopes for it as an event. I think they can do very well, and that's what I mean. Going to that area where there's a little more of a base, I think will pay off very much for them. But at the same time, I also think there's a lot more pressure on that because they've had two, and coming off one that would have made was good. They might think it's less pressure because the last one was so good. I think no, they need third one in. They need to establish that we know what we're doing and we're going to do well. So I think there's a lot of pressure on them to succeed. I think they can.
Yeah.
All right, so I have a couple of quick questions for you
Mhm.
before we sign off here. Um, and we'll try to be quick. 3 bans versus penalty versus mandatory obstacle completion.
Oh, I I have enjoyed the mandatory obstacle completion races more, but I do see why those races also um, have the potential to have major issues. You know, I think those would be harder to execute and harder to make those obstacles, because you know you have to have a really fine um, you know you have to have a really great knowledge of your athletes that are racing, um, and know how to gauge that difficulty level. It kind of reminds me of setting for rock climbing. Like you want to set something that's hard enough and increases in difficulty to space climbers out. You don't, because you don't want all the climbers falling at the same hold in a competition. For instance, and that can be really challenging when you have all these athletes at like a really high level, with all very similar strengths, you know. Um, but so in obstacle racing, same thing. If you're gonna have mandatory obstacle completion, you can't have anything with like too big of a span, you know, totally knock out like most of the women's field that isn't 6 foot or whatever, you know. So I think that there's more challenges that come with it. And so the band system, it does make more sense like logically to me. I haven't, I think like it it like induces more anxiety for athletes, I would say, because it's just you can't mess up. Like it in some ways, okay, you can mess up and you can still be in the race, but well,
It's costly.
it's still really costly, even if it's like a 30-second penalty. That's the difference between first and 10th sometimes, so um
So
I
with
don't
the
know.
band system, I've never raced a race that had the band system. So when you finish,
Yeah.
you do a penalty loop based on how many bands you've lost.
Yeah, and the one thing I actually, so this kind of came to mind in I thought about it for the longer race that they had in Costa Rica. Because the obstacle that I skipped um was quite long. It was like it took like I think like Alyssa had a film of someone doing it, just like I don't know, some random like racer. Like up near the top of the women's field, I think. But it took them like 50 seconds, which is like, a huge difference
Hmm.
um than like monkey bars that take 10. And so you have the same penalty for every single
Mm.
obstacle that that is failable. Um, and that's why I kind of think the new Spartan obstacle or penalty system like almost works better, although it's maybe logistically harder, is because they have penalty loops right at the obstacles.
Yes.
And so you can lengthen them or shorten them to be right in line with how long the obstacle is. That's also how this race was the Red Bull All In, which I raced in Germany one year. They had penalty loops for every failable obstacle. Um, and the race director he had multiple people run through the obstacle, and he timed them, and then he tried to make an obstacle penalty that was 3 times as long. And that's
Yeah.
I don't know if every race kind of tries to get that combination, but that's kind of what I've heard before, is that like a penalty should be 3 times as long, or that's what we aim for.
I like that I think 2 to 3 times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm down with that because it should never be a strategy to skip an obstacle or fail an obstacle. I don't want that.
yeah,
Yeah, but we were talking about the penalty loops. We saw that one in Seattle that was like you had to carry dumbbells and then go under a bit of a crawl,
yeah,
and I'm like, oh, that was nasty. Like that definitely was a nasty
yeah.
penalty.
The other thing
I-
I like about that, doing the penalty immediately, is that you know immediately where you are.
Yeah.
So you finish the penalty, and it doesn't really change the race dynamics.
Mhm.
Whereas, like again, in these FISO races, like you fail something, and you kind of don't know, or you're like, oh no, I need to make up more time. I have to put time on these people, or I have to,
Mhm.
I'm not going to know until I finish really what my placing is.
Yeah, you might be chasing someone in front of you and not know if they have all three bands or they only have one.
And you don't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
You're like,
so it
well,
can affect your strategy and your racecraft.
yeah. Yeah. So I think, yeah, the obstacle mandatory completion and then penalties right at the obstacles, I think are more fun race strategy wise, at least.
I'm a fan of mandatory completion for elites for you
Yeah.
guys. I'm all for that. I can see it like when you get to the open waivers or whatever, like yeah, you don't want that because they might be there for 6 days, right? So
Yeah.
that because they won't quit. They're never going to quit. So, yeah, you need some. But for elites, yeah, I'm always been a fan of the mandatory completion because
Mhm.
also when you can try again, that's when you see people take chances. That's
Yeah.
when you see people do cool stuff in med. So I'm always been a fan of that. All
Totally.
right, one more question. 100-meter OCR. Is it OCR? Does it belong in the same race, in the same competition?
Oh, well, first it's super exciting. I don't know if you've watched a 100-meter
Many.
course, but yeah, I mean, it's just like the 100-meter dash and track, right? Like it's just like I understand why they're bringing it into the Olympics. I understand why, it's being incorporated into all these events because it's super thrilling to watch. And it's super easy to have, a stadium watch
Mhm.
it or whatever. I don't think the the athletes share much in common. I mean, especially because you're seeing these top times in the 100 come from like 16-year-olds.
Yep.
um, which is really cool. But that's very different than the athlete that excels at traditional OCR, which is a really endurance-based sport that you typically see older athletes excel at more because it takes longer to develop that endurance. Um, so yeah, entirely different athletes, very much more ninja kind of based, but I think it's really exciting and it shows these extremes that the sport can have.
I'm a fan. I always have been. I love it. I think you know, you're running. It's obstacles. It's obstacle course racing.
Yeah.
That's it for me. I think it's good to go. And yeah, it is the 16-year-olds and stuff and the young kids that are just flying, but let them fly, let them go. Like, I mean,
Yep.
I find it exciting to watch. I personally want to see some of the stuff that I've seen Leon do, like those 400-meter ones. That's what I want to see is like nice 400-meter obstacle courses.
Oh yeah. Or there's those military style ones that I think some
Mm,
of the Europeans do,
yeah,
where it's almost like it'll be on a track even sometimes.
yeah, yeah,
Um, is that what you're talking about?
yeah. They
Yeah.
look very exciting, and a
Yeah.
little more endurance. The only downside with the 100 meters is just so abrupt.
So fast, you can't make any mistakes.
No,
There's some images from the 100-meter in Costa Rica where there's like a guy ringing or hitting the bell, and he's just like fully in the air, like he's just like pulled on the rope or like run up the ramp, and he's like hit it, and then he comes like he crashes down on the platform.
so this is not for you next year.
I don't know if I'm in my prime for that event. It would be really fun to try it, with like lots of padding everywhere, you know?
I know some of those dives I see them when they're going onto that little crawl, like they're hitting hard on that ground.
Yeah, you need to like oil it up to really have people slide through.
Well, maybe this is why the youngins excel because they're willing to sacrifice their bodies. We break more easily now.
Yeah. There were also some injuries in the 100. I I don't know if it was maybe the wisest choice to have a 100-meter race in the rainy season in Costa Rica when they have to have
Details.
dry course to run the qualifiers.
Mm.
That seemed to be a little bit of a hiccup for them as well.
Maybe an indoor stadium next time.
Yeah, I don't know how rainy Sweden is in September, October,
Or
I'd be
just
more
cover
worried about
it.
I'd be more
or
worried
just
about
cover it.
snow.
Yeah, it fully could be inside.
Mhm.
All right, Beth, you got anything else for Nicole for tonight?
I do not. Thanks so much, Nicole, for joining us tonight and taking the time to chat with us about your racing and everything else going on in your life. So, yeah, always a pleasure. Thanks for catching up. And yeah, keep crushing it then for the rest of your season. You have some more championship races, I'm assuming. So, yeah, all the best with that.
Thank you. Hope to see you guys at some races soon.